Hi, friends. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about a really important issue of our time, and how contemplation of this issue might be significant in one's spiritual life as well as one's intellectual life. And I refer here to the issue of so called conspiracy theories. And a better name for this is conspiracist beliefs, and that's the name that psychologists often use. So I want to address where this problem comes from, I believe, and offer some solutions as well. And so I'm excited about this because a lot of people are discussing this issue, but it's very, very hard to come up with any solutions. And I don't propose to have any magic bullet here, but I do see a path forward that I'd like to share with you guys. And this is, of course, a hugely important issue of our time because it's extremely divisive. This issue has divided our communities, whether we're talking about health and wellness and vaccines, whether we're talking about QAnon, whether we're talking about election or the idea of election fraud, whether we're talking about COVID. These issues have divided our communities primarily because of the traction of conspiracist beliefs. So let's dive into this really important topic and see if we can really get somewhere with it. Okay, so first of all, in the 21st century, especially the last few years, a lot of people have a feeling of, I don't know, foreboding, we could call it. A lot more people even have a feeling of generalized anxiety. And certainly a lot of people have a feeling that there is something wrong, possibly on some very deep level. A lot of people have a feeling that our society is approaching or perhaps even teetering on some kind of precipice that we'll perhaps only be able to describe accurately once we've fallen off it or avoided it completely. Now, I share in this feeling to some extent, and I think it's a somewhat accurate feeling for reasons that I'll come to. But this is, I would say, the foundation of why people get into conspiracist beliefs, because they serve a psychological function of explaining why many of us have this generalized anxiety or feeling of foreboding or sense that something's wrong at some deep level. Now, but before I get into that, let me just address what I think is the true cause of this feeling. Okay, and it's several things coming together, as it often is. Number one, that all of us who are paying attention have knowledge about global issues that we can't do anything about, meaning to say we learn about global issues that we're helpless to solve. The most obvious example would be catastrophic climate change, but another example is pandemics or pandemic risk. Another example would be the possibility of antibiotic resistant superbug. The list goes on, right? So because we have access to diverse news media that focuses on whatever's most ominous or morbid or problematic, we are perhaps oversaturated with news about global issues that most of us can't really do anything about. So that creates generalized anxiety and a sense that there's something wrong that perhaps we don't always directly connect to what we've read. But also we have an issue of massively increased complexity, right? We have more information coming at us than ever before through the internet and multiple sources, and we're bombarded and inundated with this information more than ever before because of smartphones and tablets. We used to have a lot more time away from screens, and now, especially due to the pandemic. People have been on screens more than ever in the history of the human race in the last 18 months. So this means that they've been bombarded with complexity. So not just information, but very complex information that is difficult to parse easily on countless different topics. So it's really more than the brain can handle. Um, and the internet plays a big role here. It's exposing us to more information than we can handle, more complexity than we can handle. And our evolution, has given us these incredible brains, but still they were never designed to handle this much and this complex level of information in such a short time. And so that makes us go into overwhelm, and again, this feeling of generalized anxiety. But also, the internet has given us access to information about the scale and severity of bad actors in our society. And I would propose that some wealthy and powerful individuals who know that we teeter on the brink of catastrophic challenges like global climate change and so on, that some of these people become bad actors because they just want to get what the biggest piece of the pie they can before the whole thing goes up in flames. And because of this, pessimistic view of our future, which is not entirely justified, in fact, they are willing to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be willing to do. So we perhaps have an increase in the number of bad actors and an increase in the percentage thereof as the challenges of the 21st century grow more dire. And so awareness of those bad actors, who I'm defining as people who are willing to harm others for their own profit, that gives rise to a cynicism within us that makes us more willing to believe so-called conspiracy theories, right? Okay, so all of this is very complex, and our brains don't like that much complexity. We would like something simpler. We would like a simpler explanation, and we would like simpler and more black and white villains. And that's where conspiracist beliefs sort of come to our psychological rescue. Of course, it's no true rescue. These anxieties, this foreboding, the sense of something wrong, gets pinned onto plausible seeming conspiracies. Now, they seem plausible to those who begin to believe them and then seem to find evidence to confirm them due to cherry picking and confirmation bias. And if you don't know what those terms mean, please do look them up because they're very important to understand. But I want to explore some of the psychological reasons that people buy into conspiracist beliefs. And some of this is reflected in the literature on the subject. And maybe I can post some links to some of that psychological literature. But in a nice, simple summary, right, we want to, first of all, say that it's a conspiracy theory or a conspiracist belief when another explanation is more plausible. Okay, so these conspiracist beliefs almost always fail the test of Occam's razor, which states that other factors being equal, the simplest explanation is the best. But it's perhaps better defined as an economy of explanation, right? Meaning to say you go with the most plausible explanation, even if your emotional state or your conditioning might predispose you to favor a more emotionally or psychologically satisfying explanation. Okay, so why? Why, again, this is super important to understand why we have psychologies that seek gains wherever they can find them, even though there might be terrible cost to others. And by the way, the rise of conspiracist thinking in the last few years has indeed cost lives and has broken up countless marriages, broken up families. It's a real serious social problem. So the thing is, though, that buying into conspiracist beliefs allows us to picture ourselves as rebels against a corrupt system. It allows us to picture ourselves as heroes who are rebelling against the corrupt system. And that's very satisfying for the ego. So that's a big reason to buy into conspiracist beliefs, right? Another reason is, like I already said, it makes sense out of our anxiety and foreboding, right? If the conspiracy is true, then it renders all our anxiety and foreboding sensical. Okay. It also gives us an ego boost to imagine that we are one of the few who know the truth, right? This is very satisfying to a specific kind of ego, which is very common, to believe that you're one of the few that know the truth about this, and the majority are all duped. That's very satisfying to the ego. That makes you feel like you're cleverer than the rest. And it's not in fact the case, right? Beliefs are satisfying to the ego even if they have no basis in reality. Okay, so let's move on from the reasons. Now let's look at the problem a little more closely. The emotional charge involved with conspiracist beliefs is high, right? You get all worked up, you get passionate, you get angry, you get outraged, and there's a lot of this energy you'll see in people embracing conspiracist belief of, how dare you? For example, when people in Georgia were confronting election officials and local government officials, they were screaming at them, "You took a vow! You took a vow to uphold the truth!" Because they absolutely believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that the election had been rigged, and that's why Donald Trump lost, and that's why the Democrats took the Congress, and that these election officials had been gotten to somehow, even though they were in fact Republican, almost all of them, they had been gotten to somehow, and so they're screaming in their face, "How dare you?" And that kind of self-righteousness, it really makes you feel very alive. That's the thing. It gives you all this adrenaline, all this passion. So it's a substitute for a, a, a healthier version of aliveness. Let's put it that way, right? A lot of people want to feel alive at almost any cost because they feel numb most of the time. So these conspiracist beliefs give them aliveness in the sense of self-righteous passion or indignation or outrage. And so that can feel very galvanizing, I've got something to fight for, even if in fact all the understanding is wrong and the facts are wrong, and what they believe is demonstrably untrue, which is the case in terms of the election, and that's been very well established by lots and lots of people now. Okay, so, but I'm not here to talk about specific right and wrong so much as to illustrate the problem in general, right? The emotional charge associated with these conspiracist beliefs makes clear thinking very difficult. So it's hard to extricate yourself from the confusion. And you think you're not confused. You think you know what's going on. You found out the truth. But you are confused because you're not parsing evidence very well. And how do we know that? Because in each field that the conspiracist belief impinges on, we have experts who are agenda free, who say no, this is not the case, and I don't have time to prove that right now, but I can guarantee you it's true. So the problem here, though, is that somebody embracing conspiracist belief studies data in a way that causes them to lose the forest for the trees. Now, that's an English expression. Not all of you have English as a first language, but it's like when you're studying individual trees so intensely that you never step back and take a look at the lay of the land. You don't see the whole forest. So it's called Missing the Forest for the Trees. And this is a very serious and common issue with those who are embracing conspiracist beliefs. They miss the biggest picture view, which renders their whole argument implausible, right? And they get down in the weeds with details, and they can just sort of spam you with endless links and more evidence than you possibly could have time to read or respond to. And this is known as gish galloping, right? Where they're just bombarding you with links and as if that proves their point, right? When in fact, they're missing the forest for the trees. And I'm going to give a specific example. Now, all of you know somebody who embraces a conspiracist belief that you think is crazy, okay? Maybe you know somebody who thinks the moon landings were faked. Maybe you know somebody, who thinks even the Earth is flat, right? And there's no limit to the number of conspiracist beliefs, and you certainly know someone who embraces one that you think is crazy. So if the example I'm about to give is one that you don't think is crazy, is one that you don't think is a conspiracist belief, but is actually true, then I would just suggest to you that it does belong in the same camp, and you will see that sooner or later. Because the example I want to give is the argument amongst conspiracists that vaccines, specifically the COVID vaccines, are more harmful than they are helpful. And that, I think, is the right way to state the thesis here, because we could argue endlessly about how much harm they cause. Because, by the way, vaccines always have side effects. The question are the severe side effects of a vaccine 1 in a million? Are they 1 in 100,000? That is very difficult data to parse, right? So instead of quibbling on that level, we can just say, are vaccines more harmful than they are helpful? And the answer definitively is no, they're not. They're absolutely not. Meaning to say, the question when it comes to public health, the right question to ask is it safer for me to get the vaccine or to avoid it? And in the context, assuming a context that you will be exposed to the virus sooner or later, on average, it's safer for you to get the vaccine than avoid it. We know that for a scientific proven fact, okay? Now, on average, of course, you might be that 1 in 100,000 people who has a severe side effect. But life is a roll of the dice, okay? And you roll the dice every time you get in a car, every time you board a plane. And what I'm saying is that no reputable epidemiologist or immunologist or qualified medical physician doubts the fact that in this particular roll of the dice, on average, you are safer and better off getting vaccinated than not getting vaccinated if you're going to be exposed to the virus sooner or later. So if you're going to just stay shut up in your house, which I don't recommend for psychological reasons, then you're going to be exposed sooner or later. Okay, so this is our thesis. The vaccines are more helpful than harmful on average. But to believe the opposite, as many people do right now, millions in fact, it requires some fundamentally erroneous assumptions, okay? And this is where I want to explain the forest for the trees issue. So if you're not convinced, if you think I'm talking bullshit about vaccines, it doesn't matter, because what I'm about to say right now applies to all conspiracist beliefs. It applies to 9/11 conspiracist beliefs quite strongly, actually, and many others as well. So if you decide to dismiss my stance on vaccines, totally fine. Just consider the arguments that apply to all conspiracist beliefs, okay? So, because number one, the problem here is the scale of the conspiracy that would be required to accomplish what the conspiracists believe is happening, okay? Meaning to say, whether we're talking about 9/11, whether we're talking about vaccines, tens of thousands of people would have to be involved in the conspiracy for it to come off. In the case of vaccines, not in the case of 9/11. Probably hundreds of people would need to be involved in that case. But still, that's way too many, and I'll explain why, okay? Now, if tens of thousands of people would need to be involved to successfully carry off the the alleged vaccine conspiracy, right? That would be impossible to conceal. That scale of conspiracy internationally, globally, would be impossible to conceal. And the reason for that is there are countless independent journalists who would love to break this story with absolutely certain evidence, and they would get access to that evidence because of the phenomenon of whistleblowers. When you have hundreds of people, let alone tens of thousands, involved in a conspiracy, somebody ends up wanting to be the whistleblower because they get to be a hero, okay? So out of the tens of thousands of people who would have to be keeping the secret for this scale of conspiracy to come off, somebody would whistleblow. And some independent journalist would jump on that, get the evidence, go public with it in an undeniable way. Okay, so do you know about Substack? Do you guys know that independent journalism is flourishing again? Not on the scale it needs to flourish, God knows. Yet, because yes, mainstream media outlets, some of them are severely biased and co-opted by corporate interests, right? We do have some that are not, but we need independent journalism, and Substack is making a place for that. So we would have a whistleblower, and we would have plenty of independent journalists who'd be chomping at the bit, right? So the other thing you have to consider, okay, is not only the scale of secrecy that would be necessary, right? And let's remember, people talk. That's what humans do, right? So all these people who are keeping the secret, somebody's going to tell their husband or wife, right? Who hasn't signed the non-disclosure agreement. And one of those people's husbands or wives are going to be the whistleblower, right? It's absolutely guaranteed. Just think about human nature, you guys. People talk. They love to do that, and they would love to be the one who broke the story. But moving on, there's a problem of incentives. This is another issue of missing the forest for the trees. There's a huge problem of incentives here, okay? How are you going to incentivize a large number of people to do something really, really bad when people like to believe that they're one of the goodies, okay? We all go to Hollywood movies and we all identify with the protagonist, apart from the small percentage of society that are psychopaths and sociopaths, apart from those 5%, we go to the movies and we identify with the goodies. We want to be one of the goodies, okay? So the incentive has to be huge if we are going to betray our morality and knowingly harm the general public for profit. And the money just simply isn't there. Like if you actually look at the money made from, say, vaccines, the money isn't there to bribe tens of thousands of people on the level they would need to be bribed to totally shut up their conscience. It's just not there. Okay, a vaccine dose makes the pharmaceutical company 40 or 50 bucks, and that's at most. Okay, so you say, oh yeah, okay, that's millions or millions and millions of dollars. Yes, and these companies also have to spend a huge amount of money. Now, government funding, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you're saying government's making a huge packet out of this? I don't think so, because we would be able to, investigative journalists are more than able to track that kind of thing, to notice that bribes are happening, that this person has just acquired a new whatever, car. So I don't have time to outline all that to your satisfaction, some of you, But my argument here is that it would take a huge amount of money to properly incentivize people to betray their own moral instincts. Okay. And if you crunch the numbers, it doesn't work. It would eat up all the profit, right? The bribes you would have to pay would eat up all the profit. And so it's just not a profit model that works. Now, some people say, well, what about threats? What if these companies threaten people into silence? Well, the thing is, again, humans like to be heroes. They like to be the goodies. So people form a resistance. If they're being threatened in this totalitarian way, they form resistance. I mean, think about it. Who was more scary in the mid 20th century than the Nazis? They were freaking scary. And people formed resistances. I mean, you could be shot in the head for being part of the resistance, and people did it anyway. And we're talking you're thinking people aren't going to form resistance and whistleblow just because they're threatened. Somebody's going to do it. Somebody's going to be willing to be the hero. Somebody's going to be willing to die to be the hero. This is human nature. Out of thousands of people, somebody. Okay, so there's that. Now, the other thing I want to say, which is really important, is there's this need to demonize somebody amongst conspiracist thinkers, right? And yes, pharmaceutical companies have done bad, horrible, awful things. For example, selling huge numbers of opioids that they knew were highly addictive and they knew would likely kill people. That's an awful thing. And they did that because it made a profit. Okay. So we know these companies care only about profit. But you've got to remember, helping people can also be profitable. It would be insane to imagine that pharmaceutical companies only want to make a profit through products that don't do what they claim or are actually harmful. No, of course, due to the need for some good PR, pharmaceutical companies also want to make a profit off helping people if they can. And if they have a choice between profiting from something helpful and profiting from something harmful, they're going to choose the former when possible. I absolutely agree that profit is all they care about. But again, helping people can be profitable. And I propose to you that pharmaceutical companies do try to develop medications and vaccines that are safe and clean and helpful. They try their best to do that, because if they can make a ton of money and not kill anyone or kill the minimum number of people possible while helping a bunch of others, they're going to do that because they're not stupid, right? They want to make more money next year and 10 years from now. Okay. They don't want to end up like Purdue Pharma, which has gone bankrupt because of their role in the opioid epidemic. Okay. So think about that. Forest for the trees. It's just common sense. Okay, lastly, the problem of evaluating expertise, right? Because we have lots of people saying vis-a-vis COVID, vis-a-vis vaccines, what about these experts over here? They have degrees, they're credentialed, they're saying these vaccines are not safe. Okay, so sad to say, as an expert in education and pedagogy who's been through many universities, it's really the case that somebody can hold a PhD in something and still not know what they're talking about, right? Unless it's the tiny little niche area of their exact dissertation topic, okay? So the degree itself is not sufficient. The question is, are they employed by a reputable firm? Not are they degreed, but are they credentialed and employed by a reputable firm in their field, right? So for example, if we're talking about quantum physics, okay, is the person claiming they know about quantum physics actually employed as a physicist, right? That's key. because if they're not employed as a physicist, they might have a degree in physics, but it's not likely that they are very good at it or they would have a job. Okay, there's that. But then there's the other important issue of citations. Is this person cited extensively in peer-reviewed academic and medical journals? That's another mark of credibility. Okay, so it's not enough that their credentials look good in the paragraph that's appended to their YouTube video or whatever other source you're looking at. You have to look deeper. So we have a problem of evaluating expertise well. The people who claim to be offering a compelling alternative narrative and who seem to be credentialed, many of them really are not respected within their field. And what they're seeking is a platform. They're seeking name and fame and the opportunity to market themselves. And so that's a very serious thing. I mean, people get intoxicated by having lots of people listening to them all of a sudden when there weren't so many before. Then we have the example of, very smart people, very well credentialed people who fall prey to conspiracist beliefs for the psychological reasons I've already outlined. So one good example would be Brett Weinstein. Now, he is no longer employed, which is perhaps significant, but he is a very smart person. He is, an evolutionary biologist, and yet he has fallen prey to conspiracist thinking for, I would say, the psychological reasons I've already outlined, and the need for a platform, right? He lost his university job for other reasons. I don't, but he and I don't think he should have lost his university job, but he needs a platform, and this is giving him a platform, saying, oh, vaccines aren't safe, and they're suppressing the knowledge of ivermectin, and this is just nonsense. It's nonsense. And look, okay, I can cite a couple of sources, but I don't want to get into the weeds because that's not the point of the video. Okay. But just one quick example of where this very, very smart person overlooks a key fact that he must know and should know. No, he must know, which is that he claims that the vaccines are actually bad because they're driving the development of new variants of the virus. Because the more people are vaccinated, the more new variants will be selected for. Now, this is using the language of his specialty, evolutionary biology. But it's bizarre that he doesn't mention the really important fact that natural immunity also drives variants. If people get COVID and then develop antibodies, right, then that selects for new variants because their antibodies are fighting off the current variants. So natural immunity drives new variants just as much, exactly as much as vaccines do. And for him to not say that is so strange that one has to suspect bad faith, that he wants his platform at the cost of even being disingenuous about his knowledge. But anyway, so that's just an example. I don't want to get into the weeds about the example. I just want to say this is happening all over the place. That's one of many, many examples. Okay, so let's get to conclusions and solutions. So conspiracist thinking, it gives us someone to hate, to be outraged at, to blame, right? We see that also with that Brett Weinstein example. He calls it the crime of the century, right? That ivermectin is being suppressed and vaccines are being peddled. And let me just pause for just a moment and say, this is really strange, by the way, that the anti-vaccine crowd is embracing ivermectin, because guess what? It's manufactured by, you got it, a pharmaceutical company, and has made billions in profits, and they would be more than happy to push ivermectin and make billions more in profits if they had reason to believe that it actually worked as well as we don't know yet. The trials are happening. We don't know. But of course, Merck, that makes ivermectin, other companies too, but mainly Merck, they want to make the money. They're a pharmaceutical. How can you say the pharmaceutical companies are bad? Let's all take ivermectin made by a pharmaceutical company. I don't understand that. But anyway, somebody's got an answer, you know it, and they're typing it. But they're missing the point, because this is using specific examples to paint a picture of a wider issue, right? Somebody's got to be the bad guy, and it's the pharmaceutical companies that make the vaccines, not the ones who make ivermectin for some reason. But let's move on, because there's many other issues that can be solved if we understand how to address conspiracist thinking. Okay. Now, instead of arguing with the person embracing conspiracist beliefs and saying, look at this data, look at this evidence, see, that's not going to work. Okay, because when you're really into the conspiracist thinking, it's much like being indoctrinated into a cult. I'm not saying it is a cult. I'm saying it's much like being indoctrinated into a cult. It becomes dogmatic, a dogmatically held belief. So evidence is not going to work. And by the way, the psychological literature comments on this, that conspiracist beliefs are self-insulating. And they take the absence of evidence against their belief to be evidence for it. And they take evidence against their belief to be propaganda, to be evidence of propaganda against the truth. So there's literally nothing you can say to a belief that's that completely insulated and that circular in its reasoning. Okay, so what you need to do is take a different approach, and this is it. Ask the person embracing the conspiracist belief, what sort of evidence would convince you that you've been wrong about this issue? What sort of evidence would convince you that you've been wrong about this issue? Now, you see, because any argument that has any validity to it has to be provable or falsifiable, right? So if it's not falsifiable, it's not even an argument, it's just a dogma. So this is why the question is very important. When you say, what sort of evidence would convince you that you're wrong? If they say none, well, that's proof that it is akin to a religious dogma. It's not a fact-based belief if there's no evidence that could possibly convince them that they're wrong, right? Now, you know, and if they really hesitate to answer that question, you know they haven't thought about it. What sort of evidence would prove that I'm wrong? Would convince me that I'm wrong, right? And if there isn't such a thing, again, there's no logic involved here. And if they can see that, they might start to sow a seed of doubt in themselves, beneficial doubt. Now, if they say, this sort of evidence would convince me that I'm wrong, then you could say, well, are you sure that that evidence doesn't exist? Because you've probably been looking for evidence that seems to prove you right. Have you bothered to look for evidence that would seem to prove you wrong? Okay, so it's not foolproof, but it's a start, okay? And then the second question to ask the person engaged in conspiracist thinking is it possible to exaggerate the extent to which these institutions are corrupt? Is it possible to exaggerate the extent to which these institutions are corrupt? Now, if the person says no, it's not, or they hesitate, you know they're engaged in black and white thinking. This is serious, okay? Because yes, our institutions are corrupt, right? There's money to be made through corruption, but the minority, taken as a total, the minority of people involved in government are substantially corrupt because they know it's a risk. I'm not saying there's a lot of good people in government. I kind of doubt that, but there's a lot of people in government and pharmaceutical companies who don't want to go to jail. Okay, so a minority are willing to take the gamble of being caught for the payoff. So maybe everyone is potentially corrupt, but only a few people are actually corrupt, right? So our institutions are built in such a way that they transcend the possibility of corruption, except in the cases of the most greedy and venal um, people or people with God complexes. So yes, there are problems in our institutions. World Health Organization, governments, and so on. There are problems, but that doesn't mean that they aren't more reliable than not. This is the question you have to ask yourself. Given the incentives and the disincentives, are they more reliable than not? In the case of the World Health Organization, yes. You know, uh, sometimes these are shifting sands, right? The CDC in the last few years has been less reliable than the CDC before that. And let's remember that the previous president dissolved the pandemic, board or panel or committee at the CDC before the pandemic came along. So that's unfortunate. But the World Health Organization is more reliable than it's not. And again, not saying there's no corruption. I'm saying it's very possible to exaggerate how much there is. And so here we have to understand that black and white thinking is a major problem in society today, and that people have lost the ability to think in terms of probabilities. What's more likely? What's less likely? Okay, and this loss of ability has very serious consequences, because yes, there's a chance that if you take the vaccine, it could injure you, and there's a chance if you fly in the plane, it could crash, but it's not that likely. So you take the gamble if you're a reasonable person. But if you've been indoctrinated with fear, then the risk becomes exaggerated in your mind. Let's choose a more neutral example, maybe, which is parents afraid that their children will be abducted by a pedophile or a predator. Now, children are sexually abused almost always by somebody known to the family. Okay, that's really significant. Your child has a less than a 1 in a million chance of being abducted by a total stranger, and yet parents act as if the chance is more like 1 in 100, right? And that's why kids can't play unsupervised the way they used to when I was growing up, because the chances of such an abduction has been greatly exaggerated in the minds of fear-stricken parents. Okay, so the same applies in these other cases. Back to the institutional issue, though. Institutions, whether government or pharmaceuticals or whatever, they're made of people. They're made of real human beings. Human beings are problematic, they are messy, but people want to believe that they're on the good side, even if they're deluded and confused, right? So you have to remember the incentives have to be very strong to make people do knowingly harm others for profit. Very, very, very strong, right? And people are really good at telling themselves stories that convince themselves otherwise. Even the Sacklers, right? Who basically are just responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths through their opioids. They've even convinced themselves. Even they have convinced themselves that they didn't do anything wrong, Now, this brings us to this issue of stories. People tell themselves stories, right, that justify their actions. And on the spiritual path, we talk about that stories are not facts, thoughts are not true. Now, some people have objected to my anti-conspiracist posts on Facebook, um, you know, where I attempt to show, or at least suggest that vaccines are safe and that there's no big conspiracy, and such like. People have objected to these posts and say I'm not embodying my own teachings because I'm believing my own story, or I'm believing the story I want to believe, that vaccines are safe, or that 9/11 was really carried out by Al Qaeda, or whatever the thing is, right? Aren't you believing a story and failing to be sufficiently open-minded? Well, I know it can look that way, right? Because when you're trying to, kind of combat misinformation, you talk as if what you know to be almost definitely true is true, right? Because the problem is when you're dealing with conspiracist thinkers, if you allow even a tiny bit of doubt, that gets leapt upon as being much more significant than it is. So I'm not saying my strategy was correct, but when we are combating disinformation, we do end up suggesting that what's extremely likely to be true is in fact true. Now, is it the case that I don't know for sure? Of course it is. I don't know anything for sure, right? But everything in life being a gamble, I buy that plane ticket or ride in that car on the basis of my 99% surety that I probably won't die on that vehicle, So, but I could be wrong. And in the same way, I don't know anything for sure, but I'm going to act on the basis of very high probabilities, what seemed to me, based on all the evidence, to be very high probabilities. Now, can I parse all the evidence? No. That's why we have to rely on experts, and one of the most important principles of epistemology is knowing who to trust. And one of the most important spiritual principles too. It's called agama in Sanskrit. And that means discerning who is trustworthy. How do you discern that? Because you see them parse evidence intelligently and effectively. You see them address possible objections to their view cogently. You see them free of emotional charge. You see them reasonable and calmly dissecting the problem and addressing that which is most plausible, as well as that which isn't, and why. And you develop an instinct for this as a critical thinker of who you can trust, because you can't look at all the data yourself, right? I'm not an epidemiologist, but I have a good sense of who is trustworthy on subjects that I don't know enough about. And in fact, it's a skill that one can develop in grad school. Many people don't, but you can, to just look at somebody's academic work and see if it looks robust and is properly cited or not. This is much harder in niche fields and in extremely technical papers, but that's when you have to rely on agama. Okay, so this video is not going to satisfy many people, but it will be helpful for other people. So that's why I did it. Take care, everyone. And let's pray. Let's pray that we heal the problem of doubt and distrust. Of course, we have to have a healthy amount of distrust, right? But doubt, distrust, and conspiracist thinking is currently crippling our efforts to end the pandemic, which, due to conspiracist thinking, might never end. But it's also affecting us on many other fronts, right? In the field of information technology and in so many fields, right? So moving forward as a species, it's not that, we're faced with some major challenges, because if we don't find unity on a global level, right? If we don't find unity as a human species on the most important issues to solve: catastrophic climate change, the threat of nuclear war, the possibility of major pandemic risk due to overfarming animals. The list goes on. If these are all global issues that transcend national borders and boundaries, so if we cannot come together both within societies and globally, uh, the chances of civilization surviving much longer are slim indeed. And if it all goes up in smoke, of course, that's fine too. And, one imagines there very easily could be advanced alien races out there keeping an eye on us right now to see if we get through this part. And if we do, then they'll show up and say, hey guys, yeah, glad you made it. Because a lot of people think, and I'm one of them, that the great filter is upon us. This is the clinch point, if that's a word, that most civilizations don't make it through in the galaxy, right? And if we do, then we get to join into prosperity. Maybe I'm just speculating. I'm not saying I know this or anything, right? But it seems very, very, very much possible. And to learn more about why I might say that, learn about the Fermi paradox and the great filter. You can look those things up and learn about them. So it's not actually science fiction. What I'm saying, it's very, very plausible. Anyway, take care. Good luck. May the grace be with you.